The second piece of news came out of Cycling News. Stephen Ferron there. Perhaps the UCI has been reading my Twitter account, been talking about some of the injustices of the relegation battle. Apparently not confirmed yet, but the 2023 World Tour could include 20 teams, not the 18. That means the 2 that would get relegated. Virtually, Lotto and Israel, as it stands, would not be relegated. Then there would be more, and so many pro teams. They would then have to change the rules so that 25 teams can do Grand Tours. If we're talking about safety, that would mean they need to increase the maximum size of the peloton to 200 riders. Current limit's 176. And then there would be up to 28 teams for other events. Zwift have just announced a new smart trainer to the Zwift Hub, on sale from the 3rd of October. You can pre-register if you're in the UK, Europe, USA. Zwift are breaking down the barriers to indoor training by making this trainer cheaper and easier to set up than any other trainer on the market. If you compare it to other trainers of a similar spec, don't take my word for it. Go and see the independent review guys on YouTube. It's crazy, crazy price. And that's just breaking down the barriers. So they're rolling out on 3rd of October. To sign up for notifications for when Zwift Hub goes on sale, or to find out more about Zwift and the new smart trainer, head to Zwift.com or to Zwift's YouTube channel. I mean, Toe Gegenhardt tweeted asking for solidarity with riders in this unfortunate position the other week. There has been solidarity between the teams, in case you didn't know, who are at the risk of relegation, all of them whilst battling hard on the pitch, or on the why have I said pitch twice? It's not a full podcast. In the races, they being Cofidis, Bike Exchange, Jayco, EF Education, Easy Post, Movistar, Lotto Soudal, Israel Premier Tech, they have been lobbying and almost, I think, I'm not sure exactly, but certainly lobbying and maybe threatening legal action to the UCI, saying you need to suspend this. So I'm not surprised this come out, Benji, but I think it is unbelievable to make the teams do all this dance, all this stress for 8 months to then can it at the end is, to me, just the worst way to, the worst way is to go through with an unfair system, but this is the second worst way to do it.
Yes, certainly. Now, for context, I believe that the UCI I think the ASO was the biggest organization that wanted this. They reduced the amount of teams in World Tour from 20 to 18 before, with the aim to go to 16 at some point. I think that idea to go to 16 was then canned for a bit, or might still have been in the plans for the future. I don't know that for certain, but they reduced the amount of World Tour teams on purpose. I think one of the ideas behind it was safety and so forth, like you mentioned. I probably think there's also other reasons involved behind the scenes that I cannot name at the moment, but that's something they did. Now, upping it again from 18 to 20, my first question is, well, let's say we do this. Let's say we up it to 20, we do all this, we're fine with 3 years of a slight bit more risk, for example, in terms of crashes with a larger peloton. They sign off on it. The riders union is fine with it because the CPA is also fine with it because it offers more work for riders and for staff members in World Tour and so forth. So it's better for the economy of that side. What happens in 2026 then? Do we just ditch 2 World Tour teams with no promotion? Do we ditch 4 teams with 2 promotions? Because I'd find it unfair for pro teams if, let's say, there's no promotion then next term. If they, for example, say, okay, next time in 2026, we'll just lose 2 World Tour teams, then there's no promotion possible for pro teams. I think that's a no-go. I think it's more obvious that the way to go then is a relegation where you end up with 18 at the top in World Tour again. So 4 teams would be dropping and 2 teams would be promoting in that sense. That makes sense?
It's what the UCI is going to hope for, is that just like 2 teams fold and that the natural evolution of teams folding happens. I think that's probably what they hoped would happen. Like maybe in Astana, they don't get the funding sorted, so then that takes away one headache. The thing is, you can have a relegation system. It exists in football. It doesn't exist in American sports. It doesn't exist in Australian sports, I don't think, like AFL or NRL, or cricket for the most part. They're closed leagues. You can have relegation, but you have to set it up properly. And Vorters, enemy of the podcast, Vorters has an open invite to come on the podcast. I don't know why the podcast account is blocked. We never did anything on the podcast account to Vorters.
Yeah, I spoke to him a few times before we actually got blocked, and I think then eventually we got blocked somewhere towards the end of the Tour de France. I don't know what the exact reason there is, but that ended up happening on my account at least. Anyway, I've got his phone number so I can call him in the middle of the night if I want.
Anyway, open invite to come on. We share his grievances. What he said it's promotion or staying in World Tour or death. There's no relegation, because if EF get relegated, they're done. Unless their sponsors are very understanding. No wild cards and no automatic wild cards, no discretionary wild card invites, most likely, unless Carapaz is that big a draw. I don't think he is. And with no local American calendar, very, very difficult, I would think, to convince a sponsor that it's worth staying on board. And so he's right in that these other relegation systems have parachute payments where if you get relegated, you get a bucket of money, I believe. They have revenue sharing. They have a system of coming back up the next year. There's all these things which are not in place here. Yes, you have the wild cards, but that's not automatic. That's just if you're lucky enough that your year where you're better than the first 2 years, you get a lot of points, then you might be saved. Like Lotto, if they get relegated, it doesn't matter. Whereas EF, just because they're having a bad year this year, but 2 good years before, that means they don't get wildcards. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, let us know. Is there any relegation system in the world that's on a 3-year cycle, not an annual cycle?
Is the reasoning behind it to avoid situations like we had in the last 3 years, to make sure that if something happens in 3 years that causes some injustice towards a certain team, that it doesn't impact them for the 3 years? If a certain key rider crashes out and is out for a year, that it doesn't impact them so severely over 3 years? Is that the thought process behind the 3-year cycle?
I think the thought process is yes, that evening out bad luck, and also so you can say to a sponsor, we're guaranteed to be in World Tour for 3 years. But that also means you're guaranteed to be out of World Tour for 3 years if you get relegated. So not great. So yeah, it's during a pandemic, like with races being cancelled, with different rules in different countries, with riders stuck in certain countries, with riders getting COVID, with COVID rules changing between races by this race organizer, races by that race organizer, not in 2020, now, today, then it's just a farce to proceed with this. It's become a joke. And even Benji found this. So just to explain to people, sorry. World Tour teams are automatically invited to World Tour races. So there is equality in that sense. They are automatically invited. Organizers have no choice but to have them come. Pro races, .1 races, where a lot of these points and the farming for points is happening, the organizers have discretion. And one race organizer who have Lotto, the company as a sponsor, they were joking that they didn't invite EF in solidarity with Lotto. What a farce that is.
Yeah, I think it was Famin Ardennes Classic or something that was joking around about that specific incident about, Lotto being at the start and EF not being at the start. That's a farce. I can't say much more about it. That shouldn't happen. That's unfair. And that's a big issue in my opinion. I think if an EF goes to ask to ride a certain Belgian classic, they should have the same chance as a Belgian team going there. I know that financially a Belgian team going there is worth more for a sponsor of a race, for example, but Otherwise, the competition isn't fair for the UCI points. Now, another point that I want to make, something next to this, we're talking about men's cycling UCI points. Women's cycling has a UCI points relegation system, and it's active. Is that cancelled? Like, if
But
this
Benji,
happens in men's cycling,
why did they give Roland Coggius? I know they've got some okay results. Why would they have a relegation system, but then give World Tour licenses last cycle to teams which are nowhere near the Trek, Jumbo, Movistar?
yes, but I think the opposing argument is that they did it in a certain way. I don't know what the specific way was, but if I recall, at the end of this year, the top X amount of teams in UCI points from 1 year only, that will be defined. So having Koyas for this year as a World Tour team, I don't have an issue with that. If after that year, if they can't prove that they're World Tour, then they're out again for next year, for example. So I think that kind of solves that issue. And I think they gradually move towards a 3 year system where I think there might be another 1 year cycle, then a 2 year cycle, and then it starts 3 year cycles or something. It's something like that. But I'll go into this at some point on the podcast once we've got a better full on understanding of the women's cycling relegation system as well. I wrote it on Twitter at some point, but there's no way I'm going to find that tweet so easily, I'm afraid.
Other random events that have impacted this system, for example, is Paris-Nice being curtailed and cancelled early, UAE Tour in 2020 being cancelled early. Now, Movistar won the Tour of Britain because it was cancelled 3 stages early because the Queen passed
Yeah.
away yesterday. So Movistar had Serrano in the leader's jersey, and who knows if he would have kept it, and they get an 85 point or so boost because he wasn't in their top 10 initially. Like, these sort of random events are impacting the relegation. It's crazy. The simple solution, already said it before, World Tour points count to World Tour teams, and the worst 2 World Tour teams, based on their World Tour points, get relegated. Pro teams have a collection of 20 pro races that they're all automatically invited to. The best 2 pro teams, based on the points from their collection of the pro races, get promoted if you want to have a promotion relegation system. Not hard. It's how every pretty much promotion relegation
But
system works.
I think the one issue I have with that system is when you say you specify 20 races for pro teams to score points, and I think organizers would have issue with that. I think one organizer will say, "Well, why is my race not in this?" And then the other will say, "Why is my race not in this?" And that's the one issue I see with that system. But I do agree that World Tour should be fought in World Tour, Pro Team should be fought in Pro Team. Conti, I'm not certain about. I'm pretty sure that Conti can just go to Pro Team if they've got enough money and the other way around or something. I think that's fine. That system.
Yeah, it's a good point. Read the pro team. I mean, would they want to be in the collection of 20? Then they've got to invite everyone. Probably, yeah, because it makes their race much more important. Like Kerner is a pro race. Like, that'd be, I don't know. It's just 2 seconds of thinking about it makes a bit more sense to me logically. And then the points as between World Tour and Pro, that discussion evaporates. Doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if Pro points are
Yeah.
worth 500 times more because it's all siloed in
And
each one.
and if you do that, you can also ditch the limit of 10 riders only mattering, right? Because I think that limit, the fact that only the top 10 riders of a team matter, I thought that was because they wanted to make it fair game between World Tour and Pro teams. Or
Yes,
is that not?
I
Then they can
think
ditch it.
so. I don't really know. A lot. I don't know exactly the logic. There's no. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Like a blue paper explaining the logic behind
Yeah.
the entire system. Anyway, that's the news from Cycling News today. That article that possibly the UCI is thinking of canning the relegation this year at the the last hour, and they will maybe make the Peloton 30 riders bigger for Grand Tours next year instead. So that's great news.